Hey guys, what's going on? My name's Eric. Today I am reviewing a brand new album by Don Diablo. It's called Future. It just came out today as I'm recording this. Now, if you keep up with the EDM scene, you may know Don Diablo is one of the pioneers of the Future House movement, sort of up there with Oliver Heldens. While Oliver Heldens has kind of retreated to a more underground club sound, Don Diablo's really brought out his bright and bouncy Future House signature sound. Over the years, he's started his own label, his Hexagon imprint, which has inspired a lot of other Future House artists like Mike Williams, Bali Bandits, Drop Gun, a lot of the ones under his label actually. And now finally we have not quite a debut album, but it may as well be, as it's his first since he's really defined himself under this genre. So I think the first thing to say about this album is something I really have to commend, and that is Don's style. While he has been a pioneer of the Future House movement, and there have been a lot of other artists who have developed a similar sound, Don has a really signature sound. As soon as you hear any of these tracks, you know it's him. I guess it's really important to put this point first, because with whatever criticisms I have to say, this point stands, and that is really something that he has to be commended on, especially in an age where so many artists are really just trying to, you know, cap in on a certain genre, really just be the next artist, really as opposed to trying to invent something new. All throughout the album, even in the most generic songs, Don's style is really present. Even the most generic songs on the album, which I wasn't as fond of, you know, I still can't quote as being generic or copied off something else, just because they are still unique, as contradictory as that sounds. With that being said, one thing that you shouldn't expect from this album, and I know a lot of people are going to go into this expecting this, is an album of bangers. You're not going to get Don Diablo's signature club sound that you've heard in other recent singles that he's dropped over the last year. This is certainly a more pop-friendly album. If you're looking for more bangers and the more traditional type of club jams, I would recommend checking out his compilation album Past, Present, Future, or his more recent remix compilation album Reconstructions. I sort of get the feeling he maybe put these out first just to give, you know, the real fans what they wanted. But with this album, you can certainly tell he's really trying to attract a new crowd as well as his older fans. Personally, I knew going in that this was going to be an album of probably more traditional style structured songs. He sort of hinted at it in some of his Hexagon Radio podcasts that, you know, a lot of these songs in this album, they're not going to be, you know, four to the floor, you know, repetitive club jams or anything like that. They are going to be a little bit more mellow in some cases, a lot of cases really not, you know, pumping club beats. And I think whether you appreciate this album is going to have a lot of dependency on this, how much tolerance you have to more of a pop style production. With all that being said though, I mean, it's not one of those albums where it is really bland and generic to the extent of something like the Chainsmokers, you know, debut album. As I said before, Don's unique production really brings this up a notch, even amongst the most generic songs on the album. And there certainly are a handful of songs on here that will definitely please the diehard fan. I think a lot of this pop style is probably owed to a lot of the collaborators actually that he's worked with on this album. I'm not sure to what extent they had in the actual songwriting process, if any, or if they just merely sung the songs that he'd written. In all cases, they aren't production collaborators, they are purely singers. But whether they had any hand writing chord progressions or anything else, I don't know. I don't know if that has any influence on some of the songs either. It's certainly a good variety of collaborators of a lot of different styles, some of which have been featured on his previous singles before, a lot of newcomers as well. Pleased to see a little bit of Australian talent on there even. So as far as my personal opinion goes, I think about maybe a bit over half of this album is pretty decent. It opens with a fairly catchy track called Back to Us, which kind of showcases Don's signature style reasonably while keeping a little bit of light pop production. The track that follows, I think, is really one of the standouts of the album, at least as far as new songs go. It's called Everybody Somebody. Has a nice little message there, but mainly the drop as well is probably something a little bit more unique for Don. It's kind of crossover between future bass and future house, whilst probably not venturing too far in that direction like, say, maybe his most recent single People Say. Unfortunately, I think for the next half of the album there is a bit of declining quality. A lot of these songs following from here, they feel a little bit generic. Despite what I said before about incorporating Don's signature style, I think even that can't really save a lot of these songs just because the chord progressions seem fairly dull, and it kind of retreats to a very familiar pop ground. A really prominent trend I've noticed, at least in a lot of modern pop music, it's sort of getting influenced from indie and R&B, not in a good way. Trying to take this trend of not being too ambitious because being too ambitious is not cool, or, you know, and ends up just not really being much of anything and kind of just turns out meh. Sprawled amongst this sort of mediocre section of the album, there are some bright spots however. Higher by Betty Who was a great track, an Australian artist on this album. followed by Take Her Place, which of course was a single that Don released with Arizona, I think a couple of months back. Even the following track with James Newman, who's actually John Newman's brother, was pretty decent, had a fairly signature Don drop, which was a little bit more ambitious than at least the verses went. I think where you really start to notice a gradual increase in quality is when it hits the halfway point of the album, as I said. There's another song with Bully Songs, who also did that other really great song on this album, Everybody's Somebody. This one has a little bit more guitar, which gives it a lot of character, I found. Just overall a little bit more moving. Again, I don't know if that's really due to the collaborator working on this song with Don, or if they did even at all. The next song, Reflections, is a departure from this kind of generic pop style with a little bit more indie influence, which I think paired with Don's production really complement each other nicely. Then of course after that we really hit a wild card with the following track, which was another single, You Can't Change Me. I think really once it hits this point you really notice the quality difference, and you sort of start to wonder, okay, it's reached this high note, how is it going to maintain this? Is it going to maintain this at all? Smartly, Don decided to follow up that one with another great single, Don't Let Go. And while this part of the album's probably heavier on songs that have already been released, I have to say a couple of the tracks that followed were quite impressive. The following track was actually another one of my favourites on this album. It was with Dave Thomas Jr., who you may know as the collaborator that Don did Silence on a couple of years ago, I think it was now. It opens with a really euphoric chord progression, which I just love, partly because I wrote it. Basically, back in October when I was in Brazil, I was working on one of the songs from my own upcoming EP. I came up with this chord progression and I was really stoked with it. Looks like I'll have to ditch that one now because if I release that song, I'm going to get a lot of flack for ripping off Don, which of course I didn't because I'd never heard this song up until now. I'm both pleased to see a really great track on this album and at the same time kind of bummed that I can't use my own idea anymore. Regardless, Killer with Dave Thomas Jr., another highlight of this album. Next couple of songs I'm like kind of in between for me. They're not quite meh, but they're also not that great either. One of them is of course the single that Don released, People Say, followed by an actual drum and bass track, which I don't know if Don's really, you know, that's going to be the next big thing for him, or if he's just sort of experimenting with this. There's no actual collaborator featured on this track, though there clearly is some featured vocals from an artist who sounds like they're out of a metal band. And then to end the album, we have a really uplifting track called Echo. It was actually technically released before as part of a movie called Kill Switch. Don's actually reworked it a bit, I think, for this album. Very soothing track, nice one to send you off into the world. I know it's the one that Don often ends his sets on. So overall, in the end, my personal opinion, I think the second half of this album is the best part, but I really can't discount some of the other songs earlier in the album as well. So I guess if I were to kind of, you know, arrange this album myself and just include my favorites and what I think would be best if he just kept it at, the list would probably look a little bit like this. Another thing that hurts the album a little bit is something, I don't know if it's more of a recent trend or if it's been around for a while, but that is the idea of releasing singles from an album before you release it. It's okay when you do it with one or two tracks, but when it's really the strongest content of the album, and that's really what the album's legs are standing on, it does hurt it a little bit, I think. But again, this isn't another Chainsmokers scenario where they release the only good songs as singles and there's nothing else when the album comes out that's, you know, half decent. And again, I think whether you like this album is going to really come down to how much you tolerate of pop, whether you're a house purist all the way to just mad about pop, which if you're the latter, I think there's certainly a lot of stuff to love here. But as for me, you know, it's not bad, it's not amazing. I'd say it's not completely meh either, so maybe 7 out of 10. Certainly gets points for being unique, and I think you really notice a lot of Don's personality shine through this album as well. It is quite an uplifting album, and it's relaxing to listen to, so kudos for that. But let me know what you thought of it in the comments, whether it lived up to your expectations, whether you had any expectations, whether it disappointed you, whether you loved it. Let me know down below, and I will see you all next week once again in another video. Ciao.